Hi there, I'm just about to roll out some clay to put it in the two halves of this cast. Okay, this is taken from Lord Colin Moynihan's head, and I'm about to do a design that's inspired by the Olympics for him, because he was the chairman of the British Olympic Association during the Games. And I'm going to be using this stuff. I get this from Pottercraft. It's a good general purpose earthenware stoneware clay, and I like it because it's quite wide firing. I can stick it in the kiln and cook it to a certain temperature, and it's fairly generous in terms of the firing points where it will fire to, and I low fire it so that it doesn't crack so much. And in fact, I'm very lucky that it doesn't crack at all for me, hardly ever. I like the elasticity of this. Different clays are made out of different, we call them clay bodies. They're made out of different clays. So, for instance, if you're digging your garden, you find a certain type of clay there. Depending on the quality of the clay, it will be able to do different things. Some clays have got quite strong body. The molecular structure is not as fine. They tend to be able to be more load bearing and tend to be high firing and be able to deal with rougher work. But because they have sort of like a groggy quality to them, when you carve in fine detail, it splits and breaks down, and you can't really do fine stuff with them. So it's a bit like sort of textured plaster. You know, it's sort of gritty, good for covering cracks, good for strong stuff, good for big sort of sculptural stuff, but not very smooth. And then you get other bodies, other clays, for instance, like China clay, which is very fine, smooth, very small. If you look at it in molecular level, everything is very smooth, and it rolls and moves over, so it makes it very silky. You can make very fine, delicate work with it, but then its structural strength isn't so strong. So what happens is, when you have a very good clay provider like Pottercraft, is that they make bodies to get different qualities, and they mix together, a bit like if you like blended whiskies, that you will blend together what you think is a good mix, and that's what a clay body is. So this clay body is, I think, good because it will allow me to do fine detail work, but it also has a fair amount of strength. So in relatively small to medium-sized sculptures that I make, it has the strength to be able to hold them and to undergo quite a lot of work. And I also find that it's fairly forgiving in terms of firing. Clay's always kept wrapped in plastic these days. Pre-plastic, you would have great sculptors like Rodin, who would keep his clay wrapped in wet cloths, and they keep wetting the cloth to keep the clay damp. Now this clay feels quite hard to me. It's because there was a hole in the bag, so it's dried out a bit. I put it in another bag when I realised, but it's going to be a bit hard going. So don't let seeing me struggling with this put you off working with clay, because it's often softer than this. Now this is a cheese wire. I got this also from Pottercraft, but some people make their own by getting bits of doweling and just sticking quite a strong fishing wire in between. And I've made those before as well, when I had the time to make on my own tools. And I'm just slicing, so let me just show you. I'm just slicing, if I can, down through the middle. Whoops, let's do it slightly on that side. Okay. Now, if you are rolling, you want really flat, even rolling, you can use a pair of sticks, equal thickness, that you put alongside rolling battens, and those are quite useful if you're not used to doing this. And you can get those, I mean, you can just get pieces of, you know, something that's about 5mm, 6mm, half an inch or so, and use those. Now when I roll, I find, oh, I'm rolling on cloth. This is just old curtain. I use my favourite old curtains from the futon shop, and I use them around the house. They're quite cheap and they're nice colours. But I found that the ones we've had, some of the colours faded. So when I've replaced them, I've used them for rolling cloths and also to make bags for wrapping my work up in, my sculptures up in when I'm sending them away, and works really, really good. And when you're rolling, the clay will stick to the cloth that's underneath a little bit, and it stops it moving. You roll onto the cloth, by the way, because otherwise it just sticks straight onto the table. A bit like if you're rolling pastry and you haven't got any flour underneath, it can really stick quite badly to the surface. Now, every now and then, I'm finding little bits of plaster in this, and it's probably flaking off my clothes because of all the plaster work I do. If you find, and if you're working with plaster and you find bits of plaster in your clay, get rid of them, because they can affect whether you can fire it successfully or not. Plaster retains moisture. It sucks the moisture in from the surrounding clay and retains it in there, and if there's enough in there, when it's in the kiln and it fires up to higher temperatures, once it fires up to 100 degrees centigrade, which actually isn't a high temperature, but once it fires up to the point where any water in there will become steam, it can either bloat, which is where you get little pregnant looking blips on it, or it can explode your work if there's enough of it in there. Right, now that to me looks about the right thickness, and I guess, I don't know if you can see, I guess if I cut through there, no, I cut through there, it's about just over half an inch, it's about a centimetre, just under a centimetre, so it's probably about 3/4 of an inch thick. Something like that, and that's about right for what I want for my work. Now, to get it in, I'm going to do the back on this first before the front, because the back's more stable when it's lying down. And what I'm going to do is, so at the moment it's sort of roughly rectangular, and that obviously is rectangular at the bottom but circular at the top. So I'm going to carve it round there just a bit. Now there's a good chance that this won't fit, so I need to measure it. It helps to have something, well, let's see if I can find something ribbon-like. Ooh, ribbon, that's handy. Okay, so here's a ribbon, and what I'm doing is, you can do this with string or whatever you have around. If I put that from side to side in there, so that it goes down through the dip, that gives me the, if I let it flat, the width that I wanted at the back. Just a bit short. Here at the front, no problem. So I just need it a bit wider at the upper part. Or lengthwise. Let's not guess too much. Lengthwise. Ta-da! Spot on. Okay, so just need to widen it a bit wider there. Okay, now think that's about right. Now the other thing is that because of the depth of here, if I just tried to lay that flat piece on there and then squished it down, where I pushed it down, the edges would become very fluted, which would be a mess. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to cut a split through there, and on this one I'm just going to cut splits through from the side. So through the top and through the sides I've cut splits, so that when I lay the clay in there, it can fold over. Okay, like that. So I'm going to put it in to fold over like that. With clay, as long as you're really quite gentle and patient with it, it's a lovely medium because it's quite forgiving, and you can do quite a lot with it. What I'm doing here is I'm pushing it down. I'm trying to stop it from catching on the edges as I push down in case it rips. And I'm pushing from the centre to the edges. I want to tuck that right, oh, doesn't want to go there. Let me see if I slice that through there. Whether I can get that to tuck right there, okay? Yep, okay. A few little bits of plaster on there. Get rid of those. Right, now, I've got an overlap. Down here I've got an overlap with the clay from the back and the front overlap. So I'm just going to run the knife down where they overlap and then take that bit off there and the bit from underneath off there. That leaves me with a slight gap. Just going to squeeze them from the sides together so that they meet. And then I'm going to take a piece of clay that I'm cutting like that, so a little sausage of clay, and I'm just pushing that along that join. To hold it together. And then I smear it on one side, and then I smear it in on the other side. And that will hold that together. When it comes out, there'll be a cut running down there, and I'll need to mend it from the outside as well. But for now, that'll be enough to hold it. Here, there's not much of an overlap, just a little one. One, check it hasn't got clay on it, plaster on it, and then I'm blending that in. I'll do the same the other side. So here, there's a gap where it doesn't quite meet. I don't want to squash the clay too much to get it to join together because it makes the whole area very thin. So instead, I'm going to join clay. Now, when a clay is very soft like this, you can actually get it to join together quite easily by pressing it together. Once the clay begins to dry out, this wouldn't be enough. You'd need to use slip and you'd need to score it to get it to join. Make a rough surface and put slip, which is just clay and water mixed. But when the clay is really fresh out of the bag and new like this, you can join it together, but always join it from, so if you put clay on a bit, join it from the middle to the edges. And the reason for that is a bit like when you put sticky back plastic on something. If you're not careful, you get air bubbles trapped, so you have to sort of go from one side to the other and push it across to get the air out. And you do that. Now, once you've got it joined like that, you can then go around and cut it level with the edge of your piece. What I'll do when I've finished filming, because you don't need to see it's really boring, is I'll go through all the clay that I've cut off and pick out bits of plaster, because I can reuse any of this clay as long as I wedge it to get air bubbles out. If you do this and you find that there are any areas on your edges that are really thin, like here's a bit thin and fragile here, you just join the clay on the inside. So once again, oh, it's got a bit of plaster, just pull that out. You press the clay against it, bits of, can you see there's a bit of plaster? Press the clay against it, blend it in, push it together. Okay, because you want your edges to be quite firm and broad, because otherwise they're not wide enough to join and you'll have problems with them being too fragile. And I'm going to go through all this and smooth it all out, make it nice and smooth and neat in there, so I can check that it's even. And if I feel anywhere that feels a bit too thin, I'll just push some clay onto it and check I don't trap any air underneath it. Trouble with air being trapped underneath is it's similar to the problem with the plaster being left in. It can cause bloating, and it also can cause cracks, or even if the air bubbles are big enough, it can cause some really nice explosions in the kiln because the air expands as it heats. I'll smooth that. Then I'll do the other one, and when I've done both of them, I'll show you about joining it together, because the other one is really just a repeat of this. Okay, thank you for watching. Bye bye.